Studios burned through over $1 billion making these movies, and not a single one made it past opening weekend in the public's memory. From Peter Jackson's biggest embarrassment to the movie that tried to be Nolan and failed, here are 10 huge movies that were instantly forgotten. You'd think a sci-fi movie starring Tom Holland and Daisy Ridley at the peak of their popularity would be a guaranteed hit, right? But no. Chaos Walking was supposed to be Lionsgate's next big young adult franchise. But here's the thing, they were about 5 years too late. By the time this movie hit theaters, people were pretty sick of young adult adaptations. Critics shredded it for being totally generic and predictable. It's got the same boring romance, same half-baked rebellion stuff you've seen 1,000 times. Audiences completely skipped it. Worldwide gross was barely $27 million. Nobody showed up except maybe hardcore Holland and Ridley fans, and even they weren't enough. And here's what Daisy Ridley said about it. Back when it came out, I was watching critic Mark Kermode, and once Chaos Walking flashed up, no one has turned the TV off quicker than in that moment. I think that was a lesson in you just don't know how things are gonna roll. Brad Pitt starring in a big-budget space movie sounds like an easy home run. And honestly, Ad Astra is probably the best film on this whole list. Pitt plays an astronaut searching deep space for his lost father, played by Tommy Lee Jones. Critics liked it. A thoughtful, introspective sci-fi drama from James Gray, director of The Lost City of Zed. Problem was, the marketing sold this as some big action-packed thriller. So people expecting explosions and laser guns got a slow, moody drama instead, and they didn't love it. Box office-wise, it just scraped past its budget but didn't actually make money. Released just a few years ago and already totally forgotten, it's actually good, but nobody talks about it. Pitt himself didn't care it flopped right from the start. He said most of our films, which I feel is a mistake, get defined by the opening weekend. They'll say it's a hit or it's a miss. But all of my favorite films, I found them well after the fact. This was supposed to be a huge sci-fi thriller directed by Wally Pfister, Christopher Nolan's go-to cinematographer, starring Johnny Depp, Morgan Freeman, and Cillian Murphy. Stacked cast, Nolan himself producing, big buzz. Great premise, too. Depp's character becomes this artificial superintelligence who starts going rogue. But instead of something smart and original, it just felt like a bad imitation of a Nolan movie. People figured, why watch fake Nolan when you can watch real Nolan? Critics tore it apart, nobody showed up, and it barely made back its budget. And today, completely vanished. No cult following, no defenders, just gone. On paper, this should have been huge. Based on Ubisoft's super popular video game series, directed by Justin Kurzel, who did a fantastic version of Macbeth, starring Michael Fassbender, Marion Cotillard, Jeremy Irons, seriously impressive cast. It even had the smart idea to avoid adapting any one specific game, instead focusing on the Spanish Inquisition, a new setting for the franchise. But they totally blew it by spending almost the whole movie in the modern-day storyline instead of the cool historical stuff everyone actually likes about the games. It's basically 2 hours of people sitting around talking instead of doing assassin stuff. Audiences checked out fast. Even though it made $240 million, it wasn't enough to be profitable, and by now everyone's basically forgotten it exists. First movie, Snow White and the Huntsman, actually did pretty well, almost $400 million worldwide, 2 Oscar nominations, not bad. But Kristen Stewart didn't want to come back for the sequel, so they just made a prequel about Chris Hemsworth's Huntsman character instead. Problem was, nobody really wanted that movie. You had Chris Hemsworth, Charlize Theron, Emily Blunt, Jessica Chastain, amazing cast, tons of potential. But audiences didn't care. Critics didn't like it, and it tanked hard, only $165 million worldwide, losing Universal about $70 million. Basically, a complete waste of all that star power, completely forgettable, and a pretty big disaster for the studio. Steven Spielberg is literally the most successful filmmaker ever, so it's weird to think he ever made a big-budget movie that just kinda came and went. But in 2016, He did exactly that with his adaptation of Roald Dahl's The BFG. It had a massive budget, $140 million bucks, and made just under $200 million worldwide, which after marketing costs basically means it didn't turn a profit at all. The reviews were okay. Not bad, not great, just fine. And that's exactly the problem. It's completely harmless and kind of forgettable. Mark Rylance plays the big friendly giant through tons of CGI, and it's fine. Nothing terrible, nothing amazing, just there. But because it's Spielberg, just fine wasn't enough. People moved on quickly, and now it's almost totally forgotten. When this movie was first announced, everyone was sure it would dominate awards season. Alexander Payne directing, Matt Damon and Kristen Wiig starring. Interesting concept, sounded perfect. Damon plays this guy who shrinks himself down to 5 inches tall to live cheaper and help the environment. Cool idea, right? Turns out, not really. Reviews were totally mixed. Critics felt Payne never really dug into the concept's satirical possibilities. Plus, there's this side story with Hong Chau's character. She's an activist, and it feels like her entire subplot belongs in a completely different movie. In the end, 0 Oscar nominations, critics mostly shrugged, audiences didn't show up, and it lost a ton of money, barely even made back its budget. By the time award season rolled around, everyone had basically forgotten it even existed. This was produced by Peter Jackson, based on a popular young adult book, with Jackson's longtime collaborator Christian Rivers directing. Huge budget, spectacular visual effects, and somehow still incredibly boring. The whole thing is set in this weird post-apocalyptic future where cities literally roll around on giant wheels. That sounds fun, but instead the movie decided to focus on these completely dull, forgettable characters. Critics hated it, calling it totally generic young adult stuff. Audiences clearly agreed. It made less than half its huge budget back. It only came out at the very end of 2018, and already no one remembers it. All that money, all those effects, and it just instantly faded away. Here's a $200 million action thriller from Netflix starring Ryan Gosling, Chris Evans, Ana de Armas, and you probably already forgot it existed. It came out in summer 2022 and vanished almost immediately. The whole thing feels like the definition of Netflix filler. Generic, totally bland, zero passion involved. It's honestly like a parody of those forgettable streaming blockbusters everyone complains about. Directed by the Russo brothers, the Marvel guys from Endgame, and yet somehow it still feels like barely a movie at all. Chris Evans was coming off Knives Out. Everyone thought he'd break out huge as Best Chris, but no. This one was such a dud, it actually hurt his image instead. Millions watched it in the first few days, sure, but just weeks later, it was like it never happened at all. You'd think if you're spending over $100 million to remake one of the most famous movies ever, you'd at least pick a big-name director, right? But no, instead, Paramount hired Timur Bekmambetov, the Russian guy who made Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. Now, no disrespect to him, that movie was fun in a silly way. But Ben-Hur, it just doesn't match at all. It's technically another adaptation of the original 1880 novel, but still, audiences were obviously going to compare it to the Charlton Heston classic, and compared to that, this thing is just lifeless. Even Morgan Freeman showing up didn't help. Totally wasted. It bombed hard, made less than its huge budget back, lost the studio a ton of money, and then instantly disappeared. Honestly, it didn't even get remembered for being a big flop. It just vanished completely from memory. $100 million remake of Ben-Hur, and somehow it's like it never even existed.